Okay, hello, my name's Rowan and I'm here to talk to you about my beef with the food system. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about some of the environmental consequences of the way that we produce and consume our food, as well as how we can all make changes in our own lives to have a beneficial effect on the environment. But to begin with, for a little bit of background, I'm going to read you an extract from a paper by the Food Climate Research Network called Changing What We Eat. So, the food system today is undermining the environment upon which future food security depends. It contributes some 20 to 30% of anthropogenic or man-made climate greenhouse gas emissions, is the leading cause of deforestation, land and soil degradation and biodiversity loss, and accounts for 70% of all human water use, as well as being a major source of water pollution. Food is also wasted. Some figures put the estimate at 30 to 50% of all food that is produced globally. And this loss not only undermines food security, it also represents a huge waste of water, land and other resources, as well as the generation of unnecessary carbon emissions. To compound the situation, the effects of climatic and environmental change are making food production harder and more unpredictable in many regions of the world, and this is affecting the poor and disenfranchised disproportionately. So this year in Vietnam, the second largest coffee producer in the world, huge drought has seen exports drop by as much as 40%. And between 2006 and 2010, huge drought ravaged crops and livestock herds in the Middle East between the southern Turkey border and the Persian Gulf, and this caused cereal prices to double and nutrition related diseases amongst children increased dramatically. Both crop and livestock production generate environmental costs as well as associated policy challenges. However, in recent years the focus of attention has fallen mainly on livestock production, born of the realisation that the rearing of livestock for meat, eggs and dairy products produces some 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, utilises 70% of agricultural land, including a third of arable land, potentially also competing with crop production needs. Grazing livestock and less directly the production of feed crops are together key agricultural drivers of deforestation, biodiversity loss and land degradation. So while the food system does produce enough food energy for our global population of 7 billion, it does not deliver affordable and sufficient nutrition for all. Political and economic inequalities have given rise to a situation where almost half of the world are inadequately nourished once the effects of hunger, micronutrient deficiencies and obesity are all taken into account. So I first became interested in the food system during my A-levels, whilst I was learning about the economics of trade. It made no sense to me that the food that we imported was coming from so many different places when some of it could be reasonably produced in the UK. And I came to that conclusion based solely on the opinion that it is ludicrous to transport food over such unnecessarily large distances that could be produced locally. So, according to a report by DEFRA in 2012, the UK was around 76% self-sufficient in foods that could be produced here. However, these percentages are based on farm gate value of foods rather than volume or calories, so they don't fully represent the ability to feed the nation, but what is clear is that we are some way off self-sufficiency. There are many reasons for this, but I'm going to focus on one important factor, and that is our consumption of meat. Again, in 2012, the average person in the UK consumed around 79.3 kilograms of meat each, which relates to 217 grams a day, and 131 grams of that was red meat. This represents about a 10% rise on 1990 levels. The intake of red meat is particularly important here because it takes around 10 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of beef. In comparison, 4.5 kilograms to produce 1 kilogram of pork, and 2 to 3 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of poultry. According to the Vegetarian Society, animals consume 60% of the barley grown in the UK and half of the UK's wheat production. This is a highly inefficient way of feeding people. On average, on 1 hectare of land, that's about the size of 1.5 football pitches, a farmer can feed around 30 people on land producing vegetables, fruits, cereals and vegetable fats. In comparison, if the same area is used to feed people on eggs, milk and meat, the number drops to about 5 to 10. So using so much land to produce meat is undoubtedly impacting our ability to be self-sufficient. But not all of the feed that's consumed by British reared animals is actually made in the UK. The Soil Association have made these brilliant maps to illustrate where the feed is coming from, and it shows an extremely diverse range of sources, but there's one that deserves particular attention, and that is the region of South America. In 2008, Friends of the Earth completed a study which revealed that we imported 78% of our soy bean and 34% of our soy meal from Brazil, with a further 47% of our soybean coming from Argentina. Soy contains high levels of vegetable protein and has a lower oil content than other seeds, and this makes it suitable for protein-rich feed meal, which is used to fatten up animals quickly in intensive farming systems. And in 2007, poultry feed accounted for more than half of all soy used in the UK livestock sector. Feed meal isn't just confined to soy. There are alternatives that can be homegrown, and an analysis by the Royal Agricultural College said that replacing 50% of imported soy with homegrown alternatives such as peas and beans would be relatively straightforward. So why isn't this happening? Well, ultimately, it's a legacy of the European agricultural policy, starting from the date of the Common Agricultural Policy, and this stated that imports of animal feed weren't subject to the same import taxes as other agricultural produce, which made sense for farmers to import feed rather than grow it themselves. And this has created a dependency on imported feed. So land that was previously used to grow feed here in Europe has been converted to grow other crops for which farmers receive a guaranteed price. The environmental consequences of this policy have been particularly devastating in South America. These are the areas in South America that WWF believe to be at risk from soy expansion. One absolutely key area is the Amazon rainforest. Since the 1996 ban on meat and bone meal as animal feed following the BSE crisis, the amount of land needed to produce soy for the European market has been roughly equal to the amount of land which has been deforested in the Amazon. While a more localised system of food production, using animal feed grown in Europe to feed animals reared in Europe, would help to reduce the devastating impacts of habitat loss in South America, as well as reducing the climate changing emissions generated through land use change and transporting vast quantities of feed halfway across the world, this does not go far enough. Meat and dairy combined make up 70% of total food-related greenhouse gas emissions, and these are the two largest contributions of any food group. If we're serious about averting massive environmental catastrophe, we need to be thinking about making wholesale reductions in the amount of these food groups that we eat. And the first time I was really made aware of this necessity was when I attended a lecture at UEA by Tara Garnett of the Food Climate Research Network. But contrary to what is necessary, and I hope she won't mind me nicking this slide, she highlighted the worrying upward trends in consumption, with estimates forecasting a doubling in global demand for meat by 2050, at which point the global population will have risen to around 9 billion people. So currently, worldwide, around 35 to 40% of all cereals produced are fed to livestock, and this could rise to 50% by 2050 if meat consumption continues to rise as expected. And if all these cereals were produced and fed to people, we could feed an extra 3.5 billion people. The consequences of carrying on with the status quo are almost unthinkable, but by moving towards vegetarian and vegan diets, we can go a long way to helping preventing them occurring. A recent study of British people's diets by the University of Oxford found that meat-rich diets, defined as over 100 grams a day, produce 7.2 kilograms of CO2 per day. And as you can see, in contrast, vegetarian diets produce 3.8, and vegan were even better at 2.9 kilograms of CO2 per day. So the first transition to make in our own lives is to consume less meat. Go vegetarian or go vegan. But this isn't the only shift that needs to occur if we're going to move to a truly sustainable food system. In 2013, the UN Commission on Trade and Development released a report titled "Wake Up Before It's Too Late. Make agriculture truly sustainable now for future food security in a changing climate." It recommended a rapid and significant shift away from conventional monoculture-based industrial production that depends heavily on external inputs such as manufactured nitrogen fertilizer, agrochemicals and concentrate feed. Instead, it said, the goal should be mosaics of sustainable regenerative production systems that also considerably improve the productivity of small-scale farmers and foster rural development. In the UK, this means shifting the onus of production away from large-scale, intensive farms where only one or a few crops are produced, to organically principled systems, and supporting the development of community-based agricultural smallholdings. The current conventional intensive farming system is heavily reliant on manufactured nitrogen fertilizer, which is in turn highly dependent on fossil fuels, mainly natural gas. But whilst this practice does produce high yields of cereal crops, it is very damaging to the environment. This is because nitrate is soluble and does not bind to soil surfaces, making it susceptible for drainage, loss in drainage, which can lead to water pollution. To make things worse, emissions from nitrous oxide are nearly 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and they may make up over 50% of UK agricultural emissions. All this is rather futile considering that we've got legume plants such as peas and beans which have a natural ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil. In regenerative production systems, this ability is utilised as part of a crop rotation system designed to naturally control pests and diseases, meaning there is absolutely no need for the harmful neonicotinoid pesticides that have been demonstrated to be seriously harmful to bee populations, the very creatures that we rely upon to pollinate fruits, cereals, nuts, and many herbs and spices. By growing a diverse range of crops, carefully rotated in planned cycles, allowing periods of green manure crop, such as growing clover, to restore soil fertility and fix nitrogen into the soil, alongside using organic fertilisers, such as livestock manure, soil organic matter is increased, and high levels of organic matter in the soil provide a rich environment for the development of stable soil carbons called humus, not to be confused with the type that you dip your carrot sticks into. But this raises the soil carbon level, and this process is called soil carbon sequestration. The Soil Association has done research which has demonstrated that widespread adoption of organic farming practices in the UK could sequester around 23% of UK agricultural emissions through this practice alone. But transitioning to regenerative farming practices is about a lot more than simply mitigating carbon emissions. It is about strengthening local relationships as supply chains contract and connecting people to the production of their own food, as well as developing community. Nowhere is this better demonstrated than at Norwich Farmshare, a cooperatively owned, community-supported agricultural scheme where for a monthly fee as low as £22.50, members can receive a box of weekly, seasonal, organic vegetables produced across 5 acres of farmland just outside the city centre of Norwich. Members contribute around 12 hours of work throughout the year, with open volunteering sessions on Wednesdays, Harvest Thursdays and monthly work days, providing ample opportunity for people to get involved. Not only does this give members the chance to connect with the land from which their food is produced and develop practical skills in growing food, it facilitates the development of a community bound by a shared care for the environment, a community that is supporting soil. So for the second and final transition, become a member of Norwich Farmshare and start buying local, organic, seasonal produce. By using your power as a consumer to support growers and sellers that are working hard to implement these environmentally grounded principles, together we can create change from the ground up. Thank you very much.